again, and I apologize for that. Okay, right, so I'm going to be talking about science fiction in the games of Eugene Jarvis, and this is a picture of Eugene Jarvis. He's probably best known for the invention of, or the development and design of Defender, which has been variously ranked as the top 10 most difficult arcade game, along with being one of the top 10 arcade games of all time. He's also famously known for his aphorism that the only legitimate use of a computer is to play games, and that's borne out in the games that he's designed and the ones that I'll be talking about today. So the first one I'll be touching on is Robotron 2084, and this is revolutionary really because of its input mechanism. Hopefully you can see that there at the bottom on the cabinet. Jarvis really invents the idea of the twin stick shooter, which allows the player to navigate environments of overwhelming odds and swaths of hostile enemies while being able to move and shoot at the same time. And those are concepts that are really important to exploring Jarvis's games as we go through his links, especially with the special brand of science fiction that he employs within his video games. The second game I'll be talking about is, I guess, a quasi-sequel to Robotron 2084. It's Smash TV. Smash TV, as I hope you can also see from here, also employs the twin stick mechanism or twin stick input. But what it does do is it brings in a second player. So you've got two players. You've got Captain Carnage here and Major Mayhem, and it allows those players to navigate these this strange world, really, that it exists in, which is effectively a game show, a reality show where you fight for your lives. I've included this garish and lurid picture here because this MC is important to those kind of explicit links between Smash TV and other science fiction as well as we go through. The third game is Narc. Narc departs quite significantly away from the twin stick shooter idea, and it reverts to something closer to Defender with these multiple buttons, and makes it, and it was one of the things that made Defender a very difficult game because there were so many button inputs there, and the same thing would apply to Narc as well. So this has a kind of a call back to Defender, if you like. It's also worth focusing on the kind of cabinet art as well, the focus on the cities, and that really comes through in the game as well, as we'll see a bit later on, that these rotting cities narrative, these kind of dystopias that are very evident in this brand of science fiction, are evident in these games as well. And the final game that I'll be talking about is 1992's Total Carnage. Total Carnage reverts back to the twin stick shooter, and again it's a two-player game. Instead of being a static screen as with Smash TV and Robotron, which took place on very static screens, Total Carnage is omnidirectional in its scrolling, but it still has that kind of forced isometric top-down viewpoint, which is important when we come to discuss the kind of wider social context of Total Carnage. Also important is this bomb switch as well. So Jarvis's games, along with many others as well, had smart bombs, which were effectively there to wipe out any and all enemies who were on screen at the same time, to allow you to move beyond or eradicate those kind of swaths of enemies and those impossible odds that were central to Jarvis's video games. Of course, they were there for all video games to make people keep on inserting coins. Theoretically, this work is framed around the closed world. So Paul Edwards from 1996 moves away from a kind of the linear and canonical model that's associated with kind of Cold War literature. And what he does is he synthesizes computer technology and Cold War technologies in general. And what he says is this generates a quintessentially semiotic space existing in language, iconography, and metaphor, which connects technology, strategy, and culture. So what he's really saying there is that the closed world technologies came from the cybernetics of the kind of late 1940s and early 1950s, which drove much of kind of the Cold War, permeate through into everyday life and eventually become part of everyday life. And that's something I think we can never kind of ignore around video games themselves, because the link between the Cold War and video games is inevitable and well established. Many of the early games were developed on mainframes that were dedicated to ballistic missile trajectory testing or even wargaming. But also there's an inevitable link there as well between science fiction and video games. That's equally well established. So Space War, for instance, one of the ships in Space War is based upon Buck Rogers' the TV series from the 1930s. And Star Trek appeared on a mainframe in 1972, not long after the original run of the original series, which was during the 1960s. So there's a link between the Cold War computers and video games, and between science fiction and video games, and they coalesce, if you like, in these kind of arcade games in the 1980s. And we continue to see that to this day. So Black Ops Cold War, for instance, is a forthcoming game which draws upon those kind of binary narratives, which are easy to understand because they have very easy kind of, or easy isn't the right word, straightforward good and evil narratives. So for Edwards, the closed world is a space that's radically divided against itself and is marked by displays of technology, particularly military and other high technology. And this comes through in the films of the time. RoboCop, for instance, has this very kind of militarized technology in the form of ED-209 that you can see here. You also have the hybrid human and machine cyborg, the cybernetic organism of RoboCop, who's charged with restoring order to a city, Detroit, which is bankrupt and strangely prescient in that respect, because Detroit did end up being bankrupt not long ago. But these rotting cities where the alleys are filled with garbage and vehicles that are squatting on their axes. Women are assailed by groups of men who have no care for the law. RoboCop is there effectively to restore law, doesn't strike, doesn't get tired, and questions the position of the human really within these kind of new technologies. These cities here, as you can see, they overlook these kind of rotting scenarios, and they're kind of abstract at the same time, drawing on some of the ideas that are within that. And especially, I think, within this, the corporatization. If you can see the TV screens here, they're relating to OCP, Omni Consumer Products, and they effectively were trying to cleanse the city. RoboCop is part of that kind of gentrification, if you like. And I think that comes through also in something like Blade Runner. Blade Runner makes explicit references to video games with its Atari advertising, both in the first game and the first film and the sequel. And this is to do with the identity of the human. So this is keeping androids effectively off planet or off the Earth. And Deckard, he exists in that kind of ambiguous or ambivalent space between the identity of being an android and being human. Explicitly, I think, or most relevantly to this, is The Running Man. The Running Man was a 1987 film, and Ben Richards is the protagonist, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, based on the Richard Bachman or Stephen King book of the same name. And again, you can see that rotting cities, the towering tower blocks that overlook the city. But at ground level, there you can see the way in which most or the majority of people live are abstract and away from that. The Running Man is a fight for the life of this person. That's part of the game show. The game show is effectively survival. In the film, it's the survival of Ben Richards. In the book, it's about the survival of his daughter, who is desperately ill, and his wife as well. So it has a different angle to it. But effectively, this is around a game show where someone has to survive, and that's something that comes through in the video games of Eugene Jarvis. And starting off with Robotron, the aim of Robotron is as the last human is to rescue the last human family against robot overlords. And what has happened effectively in Robotron is that humans have invented a technology that is beyond their ken, and they are now they're now overtaking the world effectively. Interestingly, Jarvis takes a lot of his cues from television, even early on with Robotron in 1982. He says that TV had always been this kind of top-down broadcast medium, very dystopian in its 1984 way of programming individuals by the cognoscenti. Video games for Jarvis allow him to move away from that, but it does take this playing with television to its logical conclusion. in the sense that this totalitarianism, when you invent a technology that gets out of hand, there's nothing you can do about it but fight back against it. But Jarvis does have a lot of hope in this, and what he goes on to say is that there is always the option of physical violence against machines. He talks about, you know, kicking in the coin slot, or putting his fist through the screen, or putting their fist through the screen. But I think his corporeality comes from his own background in pinball, and the use of the twin stick, which really kind of emphasizes the bodily input, is something that's really, really central to that. So he always says that the human has the last word with machines, just by being able to kind of destroy them, if nothing else. Narc kind of anticipates the end of the Cold War in the sense that the enemy starts to turn within. So if we think about science fiction from the 1990s, like X-Files, for instance, the enemy is always within in that. And I think that Narc starts to kind of anticipate this. This talks about drugs in the cities of America. The aim of this game is to eradicate Mr. Big, who is the drug linchpin. It does depart from that twin stick mechanic more towards a kind of defender interface, as we've already seen. And this "Say No to Drugs" campaign, which I saw earlier on the cabinet art of Narc, was part of Nancy Reagan's kind of domestic policy. But of course, Ronald Reagan had his own policy of invading Central American nations and destroying drugs before they got into the US. That was kind of anti-drugs campaign there. Narc has indirect recruitment for the DEA. So if you get to the end of the game, and you get to the high score point, it does ask you or invite you to contact your local DEA office. The player's characters, as you can hopefully see here, are dehumanized in the same way that RoboCop is. So you don't have that kind of immediate identification, perhaps, that you have with other characters. And interestingly, if you look at the image of Clarence Boddicker, this hitman for OCP here, he's very, very similar to the end of level boss, the first end of level boss at the end of the first level of Narc there. And this individual here is important when we consider Smash TV. He's a game show host who I think his game show is, I can't remember the name of his game show, it's I'd Buy That for $1, I think. And that comes through within the later video game Smash TV. And Smash TV is really the most explicit game that draws upon science fiction of the time. Survival for the characters in this is the ultimate prize. This is like Robotron and like Narc to a lesser extent a radically divided world. It's metallic throughout. There's no relief. Everything is technological. Everything is filmed. Everything is surveilled. This really, draws upon that kind of idea that the technology of the world has taken over, and the only way that you can survive is by fighting your way to the end. There are endings to this game, so unlike Robotron, which theoretically goes on forever, Narc, Smash TV, and Total Carnage do have endings within them. But this brings in a kind of combination of the Running Man and RoboCop in the way it uses advertising and award architecture. So if you remember, I touched upon the MC at the beginning. The MC here is surrounded by piles of cash and fawning females, and this is much the same that you see in 1986 RoboCop, and they both have the same kind of phraseology. So this gentleman at the bottom here would say, "I'd buy that for $1," and of course that's the same kind of thing that the MC uses within Smash TV as well. That twin stick shooting mechanic that's so obvious in Robotron allows the player to access these worlds and at least eradicate some of the enemies on there that overload the player. And it draws upon as well the closed world films of the time, Predator, Commando, RoboCop, where the gun is always primary and the man is always primary within that. So the idea of eradication is central to that as well. The final game I'm going to talk about is Total Carnage from 1992. And this is interesting because it directly draws upon the kind of television of the time. So Smash TV is kind of satirical and looks at kind of Richard Bachman, and it looks at the Running Man and brings that to a video game. Total Carnage is much closer to what we were experiencing at the time with the first Gulf War in 1991. The ultimate aim of this video game is to access the Pleasure Dome, where the characters from Smash TV await, surrounded by all of the consumer goods, the VCRs, the 2,500-inch televisions, the SUX cars that they managed to win as they go through Smash TV. So they don't just get there to survive, but they get to consume an awful lot as they go through as well. And it fuses the CNN generals of the First Gulf War. For those of us who are old enough to remember that, one of the most striking things was the commentary that surrounded this time, where you'd have uniformed personnel on television giving commentary on how the war was going effectively. And they were giving a commentary on all of these kind of technologies that were developed over the previous 40 or 50 years that we simply couldn't use, without annihilating most of the human race and most of the world with it. There is no way that we could have used a lot of the technologies, and some of them were used actually in the Gulf War. It was a semiotic and symbolic exhibition of this. The award architecture within Total Carnage offers bonus points for saving journalists and cameramen. I use those terms deliberately. The journalists are effectively women who are drawn from the women that surround the MC in Smash TV, and the cameramen are there, and they're all shouting help effectively. The use of smart weapons is also interesting, because this, I think, Gulf War was the first time where the use of smart weapons or smart bombs was deployed within the kind of military discourse. And what that was meant to do was, and you can see that from the image at the bottom there, was these were meant to expressly target militarized areas. So it would wipe out, say, a garrison, but it wouldn't touch the hospital or the school that was across the road. So it would cut down collateral damage or eliminate it entirely. So only those who were combatant effectively would be harmed. And that's the sort of thing that comes through in Total Carnage. In Total Carnage, the general at the beginning takes over a baby milk factory, and the role is to effectively to get that back by the end. But these smart bombs that you see in these images here, when we look at them zeroing in their targets, they zero in and then suddenly they disappear in static and blankness. So these kind of things become very normalized images in newscasts and things like that. But back in 1991, these were quite different. And what we were left with was these gunning men, these CNN generals providing this commentary of the Western world, which were triumphant in their omnipotent, ultimately outdated Cold War technology. They couldn't be used, they couldn't be deployed, and this was the last opportunity to provide a kind of opportunity for them to display these technologies. For Jarvis, over this time, the game has changed from saving humans explicitly in Robotron to 10 years later saving entertainment in the form of news media. While we're still in the business of saving humans, we're actually in the business of saving television. The Vietnam War was described as the first televisual war. Arguably, the Gulf War can be seen as the first video game war. In conclusion, then, science fiction of the 1980s places a price on the position of human and its identity. So we've got the corporation of OCP and Robocop, for instance, and explicitly in Blade Runner, and also Total Recall, both of those penned originally by Philip K. Dick, of course. Where does the human fit within kind of technology? But for Jarvis, I think he remains relatively pure in what he's doing and consistent even throughout this time and this inspiration from the sci-fi. So he puts the player and the human front and center in this battle. The feelings of helplessness and loss that are so essentially part of Jarvis's video games, because they are so hard and you're so overwhelmed by the technology and by the enemies, are compounded by the physicality of the player's experience. Those twin sticks give you that corporality and that ability to fight back. So while those closed world technologies of the Cold War do attempt to elide the human, to bring the machine to the fore and move the human away from it, what I would argue is that Jarvis's games, complemented by this ambiguous and ambivalent sci-fi narrative of the time, these rotting cities where effectively power was projected abroad, but the US remained kind of quite static, they continue to place the human front and center to the aim and role of the gunning man. And the gunning man's ultimate role is the protection and continuation of human life at any price. And that can be wiping out drug dealers or being triumphant on a game show, for instance. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to any questions you might have.